A recent article in TheStreet.com claims that Tesla will never reach fully autonomous driving because it's basically impossible. Unfortunately for those in the article, they are fundamentally misunderstanding the situation. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. First, a quick personal note that we just purchased a new Model Y and it's red. I have always wanted a red car, so finally got a red car. Anyway, it's got hardware 4 and everything, all the other goodness. We're obviously trading in our 2021 Model Y that we purchased just about 3 years ago in December of 2020. So soon the Dr. Know-It-All bumper sticker is going to be on a red Model Y instead of on a white one, so look out for that if you live in Georgia. And of course, as always, if you are interested in purchasing a Tesla, definitely check out my link in the description because you can get $500 off a Model Y or Model 3 or $1,000 off a Model S or X. And that link is not just in this video, it's in every video, so definitely check it out if you're interested. All right, let's turn to this article in TheStreet.com from September 18th by Ian Kreitzberg. I think it might be Kreitzberg anyway. Depends on whether you pronounce it with a European pronunciation or whether you pronounce it with an American pronunciation, whether it's Kreitzberg or Kreitzberg. And I also want to note here that I'm going to be a little bit gentle with the author of this article because there is some nuance and some subtlety to what's going on here. And that's the reason why I want to do this video. I don't just want to like flame on the person. There is some subtlety to what's going on. And of course, I could be wrong as well, because full self-driving has not been solved yet. So until it actually is, we don't know for a fact. But I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding going on here, but the misunderstanding is fundamental. And so it's kind of an easy mistake to make if you're really not in the trenches on this. So first, let's look at Ian Kreitzberg's bio. Ian Kreitzberg is a breaking, trending news writer for The Street with a focus on AI, artificial intelligence, and the markets. He covers AI companies, safety, and ethics extensively. As an offshoot of his tech beat, Ian also covers Elon Musk and his many companies, namely SpaceX and Tesla. Hey, welcome to the club, right? Ian has previously written for CNBC, Patch.com, and Screen Rant, among others. By the way, I love Screen Rant. Oh my gosh, if you haven't seen their movie pitch things, well, anyway, definitely go and check out Screen Rant, and has been recognized with numerous journalism awards, including the ACES Editing Award. So in brief, he has pretty good credentials for writing about this topic. All right, so let's go through this article and kind of pull out the threads of what is accurate in it and what is not so accurate in it. The title, of course, is Engineering Whistleblower Explains Why Safe Full Self-Driving Can't Ever Happen. And that's the thing, ever, right? People have said you will never have a chatbot that can actually talk to you in a reasonable manner. And hey, ChatGPT came along less than a year ago and proved that completely wrong. People said you will never have AI-generated art. Midjourney, DALL-E 2, by the way, DALL-E 3 has just been announced. I haven't been able to use it yet, but it has been announced. So there are breakthroughs in this kind of stuff all the time. To say never in the world of AI is a dangerous thing, and I have to, admit that I was wrong about this. I will put a link to this up here because I like to call myself out when I'm wrong. Just before, DALL-E 2 came out, I said that the golden age of AI was about over and that, we were going to go back into another winter, and wow, was I wrong. Couldn't have been more wrong. But anyway, saying can't ever happen is a really big statement. The subtitle of the article is, As it stands today, the technology to test fully autonomous vehicles is not feasible. And while I'm going to read most of this article, I will definitely put a link to it in the description because there are a lot of links that you can go into to sort of pull at some of the threads. I'm going to go down one of those rabbit holes myself in this video, but there are other ones that you can go down as well. So, beginning at the begin, pulled from the pages of science fiction, self-driving cars seem to be on the way to becoming real. Cruise and Waymo are expanding their reach with their autonomous taxi experiment, and Tesla, of course, has been amping up its full self-driving rollout and repeated promises that true full self-driving is right around the corner. Now, to their credit, Elon Musk, as Walter Isaacson, amongst many other people, including Elon Musk, has said, Elon has an optimism bias, and he's been saying it's just around the corner for 4 or 5 years, 2018, somewhere in that range. I think he promised 2019 was the first year. He said definitely by the end of 2019. So, it's taken longer than anyone, including Elon, has thought. But the technology remains heavily flawed. The Street reported last week that there are a number of vulnerabilities in the artificial intelligence models that power self-driving cars, not the least of which involves a lack of standardized testing platforms across the industry to ensure independently verified safe models. Now, while I do agree that eventually there should be standardized testing methodologies, I think it's too early. You kind of have to get to the state where you actually have fully autonomous driving and it works really, really well before you even know what a proper proper standard, what a proper testing regime, all of that kind of stuff is. So I do agree that eventually this does need to happen, but that's kind of putting the cart before the horse. Did you know that according to the 2022 annual data breach report by the Identity Theft Resource Center, the number of data breach victims has gone up by 41% in 2021, and the problem just keeps getting worse? Did you know that data brokers gather information about all of us, including our addresses, birthdays, and even our social security numbers? I've personally been involved in at least 4 major data breaches, and those are just the ones I know about. This is obviously a critical problem, but what can any of us mere mortals do? Enter Incogni, a service that will take on data brokers head on for you and get you off lists and keep you off. If you tried to do this yourself, it would be a full-time job and still you'd probably miss a bunch of the data brokers. But how hard is it to use Incogni? Super easy, actually. You sign up, you give them permission to work for you, and you sit back and relax. Incogni takes care of the rest and even shows you your progress, so you know which data brokers have removed you and who they are. I had no idea I was personally on 76 data broker lists. Yikes. After using Incogni, I feel so much safer than I did before. Incogni also removes you from people search lists, which can be abused by bad actors to find out where you live and other personal details that none of us want shared. So what are you waiting for? Go to incogni.com/knowitall or click the link in the description and get 60% off and get Incogni working for you today. Thanks to Incogni for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to check out my link, save 60% and get Incogni working for you today. And now let's get back to it. And here's where we get into it. Safe human level driving, however, isn't somewhere up around the bend, according to Navy veteran and engineer Michael DeCourt. The costs, he says, in human lives, time, and money are too high for true, safe self-driving to ever be achieved. So certainly I think that there's no argument that nobody wants to expend human lives or human health. In other words, have accidents where people are killed or injured. That is for sure something that nobody wants to have happen. Certainly not in excess of the absolute minimum number of people that are killed or injured in the quest for getting to full autonomy. But to say that there's not enough time or money is a pretty big statement there, because, big corporations, not just Tesla, but like Google and Meta and Apple, etc., have a lot of money and therefore time to put into this problem if they choose to. The issue for DeCourt, the engineer who exposed Lockheed Martin's subpar safety practices in 2006, is that artificial general intelligence, an AI with human-level intelligence and reasoning capabilities, does not exist. So the AI that makes self-driving cars work learns through extensive pattern recognition. So first of all, DeCourt is riding here on laurels from a 17-year-old whistleblower event that happened in a completely different industry than autonomous driving. So that immediately casts his authority in some degree of doubt. So DeCourt speaks of artificial general intelligence. That would be an intelligence that's able to do lots of different things and to be more or less like a human. Again, I believe that's conflating two things. I always say that AGI is very, very different than artificially intelligent agency. Agency is something that a human has. We have wants, we have desires, we try to do things. That gives us an agency. An artificially intelligent agent would act like a human. It would have desires, it would try to do things. AGI is very, very different from that, and way too many people conflate those two things. You can have an AGI. In fact, ChatGPT, sort of is an AGI, at least a low-level one. It does many, many different tasks, all of them verbal, which is not why it's not a complete AGI. But in terms of text-based stuff, you could claim that that is kind of an AGI. It's something that generally is intelligent. It knows a lot about a lot of different things. It's not specific to one task, except that the task is written, of course. But, within that world, it's very, very general, but it is absolutely not an artificially intelligent agent. That is a very, very different thing. So here I see DeCourt like really conflating these two things. You do not need an artificially intelligent agent, which is what he means by AGI, in order to drive a car. A car just has to be told what to do and execute that. It does not have to have its own motivations. We have the motivation. We're like, I need to go to the grocery store. You tell the car, I want to go to the grocery store. The car executes those plans. Really, really different from the car just waking up one morning and going like, I feel like going for a drive this morning. And of course, that's when you can start to prepare for the singularity for real. So while an AIA or artificially intelligent agent is pretty far away at this point, AGI is not that far away. And to say it doesn't exist is a little bit loosey-goosey. I think that we're edging towards that slowly but surely. And by the way, I'm not the only one that thinks that. Elon Musk has gone on record several times posting on X and stating that, Tesla's full self-driving is solving many of the problems of what he calls real-world AGI. And by the way, Elon gets this distinction. He calls it AGI and he means AGI, not AIA. And here we get to the crux of the argument. I'm going to kind of pack these two paragraphs together. So the AI that makes self-driving cars work learns through extensive pattern recognition. Human drivers, he said, are scanning their environment all the time. When they see something, whether it be a group of people about to cross an intersection or a deer at the side of the road, they react without needing to understand the details of a potential threat, color, for example. So the argument I believe Descartes is trying to make here is that humans are fundamentally different than neural networks, and that is not what he's actually arguing here. Humans are pattern recognition people. I mean, he basically says when we see something, be it a group of people at an intersection, that's pattern recognition, or a deer by the side of the road, that's pattern recognition. We then react to that potential threat. That is reaction, right? So you've got the vision system in a human being. Let's just forget about cars for a second. You got the vision system in a human being that pattern matches the world. It then semantically understands that. It puts that into some sort of semantic understanding of people, deer, road, whatever. It puts it into those categories, and then it does path planning. It says, people by road near intersection should potentially slow down, maybe weave out of the way a little bit, whatever, be cautious, that's path planning, and then executes that control in terms of like pressing the brake, turning the steering wheel, whatever that is. That is fundamentally the same thing that Teslas are doing, especially with version 12 of the full self-driving software. This is end-to-end trained. It's end-to-end trained with a massive quantity of data that comes into the vehicle from the pixels, right? The stuff that actually comes into the cameras. And that's transferred all the way through path planning and then to the actual control output in one end-to-end, probably multiple, but let's just call it one giant end-to-end neural network. That's what it's actually doing. So it's doing more or less what a person is doing. People pattern match. If you think people aren't pattern matching, I don't know what you think we're doing. That's basically what we learn. We learn to figure out what the world is like by pattern matching things. You see something and you're like, I recognize that before because I've seen thousands of examples of that thing before, of a deer, of a box by the side of the road, of pedestrians, whatever that thing is, we're pattern matching all the time. That's how we operate. So I'm definitely in the Elon Musk camp that if a human being can do it, a neural network can do it. It may be challenging for a neural network to do it, but it's not impossible. It's using the same basic technique that a human being does in order to learn how to drive. And this call out here is really interesting in its own right. The system has to experience something to learn it. Well, heck yeah. That's the way everything works in life. In order to learn something, you have to experience. That's basically how it works. And now we get to the subtlety and the reason why I'll probably title this video something like Fundamental Misunderstanding, because this demonstrates a nuanced but fundamental misunderstanding along with the AGI versus AIA debate. Anyway, the problem with these systems is that they work from the pixels out. They have to hyper-classify. Descartes told the street. Pattern recognition, he added, is just not feasible because 1, you have to stumble on all the variations, 2, you have to re-stumble on them hundreds if not thousands of times because the process is extremely inefficient. It doesn't learn right away. So there are two fundamental misunderstandings in this one paragraph. Number 1, hyper-classify. Yes, in the old school system of like ImageNet type of recognition and stuff and saying, is this a dog or a cat? The sort of classic neural network thing, that's classification. And yes, you would have to learn to classify everything in the world, at least generally. There are a lot of things that you have to classify. So that you can argue would fall into the hyper-classify type of trap. And it really is the same trap as heuristics. It's the same problem as a human being coding something, because you're like, oh yeah, I'll just code it up. I'll say, if you see a stop sign, stop. That sounds really simple. As soon as you start thinking of all of the exceptions and all of the different ways you can see a stop sign and all of the different weather that could happen in and all the different traffic patterns and all of the different circumstances, like if it's half hidden or if a human being is holding it versus it just sitting there, it gets really complicated really fast. And that's why heuristics is a rabbit hole that just won't work. You can't possibly specify manually every single corner case. The problem is he's throwing that back to neural networks and he's saying, just like an image classification network could never classify absolutely everything, he's right about that. But that's not what we're using here. We're using a fundamentally different architecture in these neural networks. They are different than a simple classification network. So that is a fundamental misunderstanding and why he's actually wrong about this. He just doesn't understand how modern neural networks work. And then the second fundamental misunderstanding is what Tesla is doing. He's like, you have to see this thousands of times. It doesn't learn right away. It has to be repeated and repeated and repeated. Well, what in the world are these, 3 million, 4 million, 5 million cars on the road that Tesla has doing except collecting data? And right now they've collected all of the basic data. They know all the basic stuff. Right now, they're just looking for those bizarre situations where something like a herd of elk is walking across the highway. And that actually happened to me many, many years ago when my kids were little tiny kids. I was driving up through Northern California on the 5 freeway and came across a herd of elk on the highway in a national park. It was pretty wild. But it's a thing that will happen once in a while. And if you have millions of cars driving hundreds of millions of miles, you will come across those corner cases, not just once, but hundreds to thousands of times. And that's exactly what you need. And so I'm like, well, okay, that's what Tesla's doing. So I'm like, why do you not understand what Tesla is actually actively doing? So then, of course, he doubles down on this. He says, you can never spend the money or the time or sacrifice the lives to get there. He said, you have to experience to learn, and you have to experience over and over again. So again, like I said, that's exactly what Tesla is doing. One interesting little caveat to all of this, of course, is that we human beings don't have to. I've only seen a herd of elk cross the highway one time in my life, but that was fine. I was like, that is a thing. I have never seen that before, but I can handle it. And I believe that in version 12 of the software, it's that basic idea. It's if a UFO crashes in the middle of the road, the car's going to go like, well, I've never seen that before, but I understand the basic parameters of that is a solid object. It's in the road. I better stop or else I'm going to hit it. So it doesn't have to hyper classify and know absolutely everything. It just has to understand the basics, and it has to understand that that's a solid object. Whether or not it can classify what that object is, it can classify it as an object that is solid that I do not want to hit. So just like a person, we are always coming across circumstances that we have never seen before while driving. We handle it. It's okay. We can manage that situation. And next we have self-driving cars would have to clock billions to hundreds of billions of miles using their current methods to achieve a fatality rate in line with that of human drivers, 1 per 100 million miles, a 2016 study by Rand found. Rand found that as self-driving cars seem to improve, it gets harder to analyze their performance accurately because of the rarity of certain edge cases. So I'm going to duck down this rabbit hole and click the Rand link and take a look at this in just a second. But first of all, billions of miles is not that out of the question for Tesla to do training. Now, hundreds of billions, that could take a long time, but billions of miles won't take them that much longer to, accumulate, whether that's on full self-driving or in shadow mode or just collecting the data. They have a lot of cars out there and they're driving a lot of miles. So they're collecting a lot of data, and billions of miles is not out of reach for them. For most other companies, yes. For Tesla, no. So let's take a look at this Rand report. And remember, you can click the link from the street.com article to get to this yourself. It's a very big report. I'm not going to go through the whole thing by any means. But the first point here is the 2.3 million reported injuries in 2013. So this is a decade old here, right? Corresponded to a failure rate of 77 reported injuries per 100 million miles. The 32,719 fatalities in 2013 correspond to a failure rate of 1.09 fatalities per 100 million miles. So of course, these numbers are actually, statistically pretty reasonable. You can drive 100 million miles before you have an expectation of a fatality or, being involved in one. The problem, of course, is there are a lot of people on the planet and they drive a lot more than 100 million miles per year, so it happens quite often. And then I want to turn to this unfortunately rather confusing chart here. I think basically what you can do is you can sort of ignore this entire right-hand side. We can just look at this far left thing, this 1.09. This dashed line is how many fatalities there are per 100 million miles of driving. So there's about one more or less. And what Rand suggests in their study here is that a car, for 95% confidence that we're talking about this car being safe, in order to be at a human level, it would have to drive approximately 275 million miles, or the collective fleet would have to do that because an individual car will never do that. But the collective fleet would have to drive 275 million miles without having a single accident or before it had the first fatal accident in order to prove that it was as safe as a human being. Their methodology, it's complicated. They have a lot of math and stuff. So again, if you want to dig deep and you want to look at it, go for it. But let's just take them at face value that that's what we've got. So their claim here is in order to prove that the car on full self-driving is as safe as a human being, it needs to drive 275 million miles without having a single fatality, or alternately, you could say that they have one fatality in that 275 million miles. So admittedly, that is a very large amount of miles to prove this according to Rand, but also that's 95% confidence level. If you only wanted 75% confidence, you're only looking at maybe 110 to 120 million miles or something. This is a logarithmic scale, so it's stretched out at the beginning and it compresses as you go up. So at a guess, we're looking at somewhere around 120 million miles of driving, so less than half of the miles driven to get to a 75% confidence level that the car is driving at the level of a human being. So now let's turn back to this paragraph, because this paragraph misrepresents the Rand report, at least as I understand it. Like I said, it's a very big report, so there may be subtleties to it, but the parts that I looked at, I was like, I don't think this paragraph is saying what the Rand report claims. Let's read this again. Self-driving cars would have to clock billions to hundreds of billions of miles using their current methods to achieve a fatality rate in line with that of human drivers. That is not what the Rand report says. It says in order to prove that it's as safe, it needs to drive 275 million miles without having an accident. That is not clocking billions to hundreds of billions of miles. That's a proof mechanism, not a training mechanism. In other words, it's not training that many miles. It's driving that many miles to prove that it's able to do that. So again, there could be some stuff in that report. It's very, very large. I haven't read it all extensively, so it could be hiding in there somewhere, but it seems like there's like a mismatch between what this is claiming about the report and what I see in the report. But anyway, it is a significant hurdle, assuming that Rand is correct in this statement. And again, remember, this report's from 2016, so it's like 7 years old. So it might not be as accurate as they say, and it's just one report stating that this is the case. But it's obviously driving 275 million miles is a lot of miles driven without a fatality in order to prove that it's as safe as a human driver. And in order to prove it's twice as safe at a 95% confidence level, we might be looking at 500 or 600 million miles without a fatality. Is that a challenging bar to hit? Absolutely. Is it impossible? Absolutely not. It's something that can be done with enough vehicles on the road, with good enough autonomous software. You can prove that the vehicle is as safe or twice as safe or 3 times as safe, etc., as a human driver. Continuing on, Tesla's beta version of full self-driving, according to Elon Musk, has covered some 300 million miles, which coincidentally is around 275 million miles. The company would have to scale up mileage by 100 to 1,000 times to create a system that is as good as a human, according to Rand's calculations. Still, as Musk himself inadvertently demonstrated in a recent demo, drivers can't yet take a nap while their Tesla takes them somewhere. Human drivers need to be ready to take control at a moment's notice. So number one, Tesla already has the miles necessary to prove that the car drives as well as a human driver. I don't know the statistics. I know that there are, investigations by NHTSA and stuff about potential fatalities and everything. And again, that's the highest bar, right? That's the thing that we want to avoid the most is fatalities. And of course, humans are in the loop with this. This is not full self-driving driving by itself, because the humans under emergency situations can and should disengage the full self-driving and take over in order to keep the car safe. So this is not a quite fair comparison. Even if they proved that they had 300 million miles and there wasn't a single fatality, that would not be proof at this point, according to Rand, because you've got a human in the loop. And so you would have to get to a point where you could prove that the vehicles were driving 300 million miles in full self-driving, and that at no point within maybe say 30 seconds or something between the time a person disengaged the vehicle and some sort of accident was the full self-driving engaged. In other words, just saying you've driven 300 million miles without a fatality, well, yeah, a person might have gone like, oh crap, the car's about to hit somebody and hit the brakes. So that's not a good comparison. So clearly there needs to be some sort of metric which extracts the human interventions out of the situation and says like, yeah, this car probably would have hit somebody or done something bad under those circumstances if a human being had not intervened, which is where we get to, of course, the demo drive, which proves, of course, that humans can't take naps. The car does not say that. And also remember remember, this was version 12 alpha. This is a very early build of version 12 of the software. And when they started the drive, Elon and I think Ashok also said that he was like, look, this car is probably going to make mistakes. It's a very early build of this software. It's not ready for public consumption yet. And even if and when it is, it's still going to be in beta. Whatever Elon Musk says about it not being beta, it's still going to be in beta. It's still going to be required that human beings are paying attention. So we're not at that point, and Tesla is not representing it as being at that point yet. They're saying this is beta, keep your hands on the wheel, stay alert, all of that kind of stuff. They warn you every time, literally every time you engage it. It's like, keep your hands on the wheel, stay alert. So anyway, while we don't have a perfect comparison yet, just assuming that 275 million miles, that is not something that's unachievable. This is the kind of thing with more and more cars going out on the road, more and more full self-driving vehicles out there driving in full self-driving mode. This is something that Tesla could prove over a period of time. They can get to a point where they can say, look, we've driven 300 million miles on full self-driving without a disengagement within 30 seconds of some sort of emergency event happening. And of course, there are lower bars for other types of accidents and things like that. But anyway, if they can prove that, and I think that they can, it seems like they would have the data to do that, they can then go to NHTSA or other regulatory authorities, present that data and say, look, we should be allowed to let this car drive on its own. And of course, that relates to this next little paragraph here, which is that Tesla is currently facing a series of investigations into the safety of its full self-driving software, which it is. Continuing on, the focus, DeCourt said, then centers around simulation because you can't spend the time and you can't sacrifice enough people to teach pattern recognition in the real world. I take issue with that. The issue with simulation training is that the game simulators currently in use are not good enough. They lack the kind of specificity and real-time performance needed to be truly safe. They can do a lot of it. They'll make progress, which is why they are where they are, he said, but they will not get far enough to where they're better than a human. So first of all, I think DeCourt is putting way too much on simulation for Tesla. Tesla does use simulation a lot, and it's a great way to get to like 90% of the way there or something. But Tesla, again, has massive amounts of real world data, and they have the cars on the road driving, and they have them doing their thing. So they're not depending on simulation. I completely agree. If they only depended on simulation, they would never get to full self-driving because the real world is more complicated than a game simulator can possibly represent. But they have real world on top of that, so they can ice the cake, so to speak, with real world examples, and they can really look at it, and they can take those real world examples that don't work particularly well, and they can run that in a simulator. So they can be very, very focused on what they're trying to do with the simulation, and they can improve the software, and they can get better and better and better very quickly. We then go on. DeCourt doesn't even think a simple scenario such as highway driving can be considered remotely safe. As soon as you go out into the public domain, it could be in front of your house. You incur so many of these problems that it's impossible to do. There are just too many crash scenarios to cover. And of course, this gets back to that hyperclassification versus world models and things like that I talked about earlier. So I'm going to leave that there, but basically I think he's just wrong about that. You don't have to have every domain covered. You can know about it close enough using the architecture that Tesla is using. The only path to true FSD, DeCourt said, would be a path lit by artificial general intelligence or AGI, and despite the frequent debate over whether AGI is even a remote possibility, unlocking AGI would not suddenly solve the problems at hand. Companies would still need to enhance their simulators and find ways to guarantee the safety of their vehicles and the strength of their AI models. So I'll just respond to that with, again, Elon Musk's tweets about the fact that Tesla, in solving full self-driving, is solving a large part of artificial general intelligence. So make of that what you will. And then, of course, we get to something that, again, shows a fundamental misunderstanding. Car makers, DeCourt said, would additionally have to enhance their sensor systems, combining the cameras that Tesla is known for with LiDAR, 3D imaging radar, and a sound localization system. So would a 3D imaging radar be useful? In fact, has Tesla developed Phoenix recently? And they've actually, there's a picture of it online that Green Lee Only showed. Yes, they have. They've been working on that for a long time. Is that going to be absolutely necessary? I think in 99% of cases, no. And in the cases where you do need it, like heavy fog, heavy snow, or super pitch black dark or something, that's level 5 autonomy. You don't have to worry about that stuff. For level 4 autonomy, you're not going to have radar. If you need it, it'll be very, very useful under those circumstances. But to get to level 4 autonomy, where it drives autonomously in most circumstances, you don't need radar. Do you need LiDAR? Absolutely not. Would it be nice to have a sound localization system? It absolutely will eventually, but that's not something, again, that's isolated icing on the cake. It can do everything it needs to with visual information. Eventually, if it can integrate some audio information, that will be helpful, but it's not necessary. And of course, as Andrej Karpathy famously talked about, the more different types of sensors you have, the more sensor fusion issues you have. So all of this stuff, it creates its own problems. It's not really a panacea. It's not a solution. It's just opening up the door to more problems. And then we get to some really interesting statistics here. Waymo and Cruise have collectively driven more than 8 million driverless miles, which seems pathetic at this point, in total, reporting around 100 crashes, which is a lot of crashes for that few miles, a ratio that works out to around 1 crash for every 60,000 miles. Now, I think most of those are pretty minor crashes, but still, that's not great statistics. In the last quarter of 2022, Tesla recorded 1 crash for every 4.85 million miles driven by autopilot, which is not a full self-driving technology. Absolutely it is. It's not full self-driving beta, but it's full self-driving. It's autonomous technology, so I don't know what he's saying there. Drivers in the US, meanwhile, crash around once every 600,000 miles. And if we turn to Tesla's Impact 2022 report, which is of course out of date by about 8 or 9 months now, but that's the latest we have, you can see that the total US fleet, there's 1.53 crashes per million miles, which equates to about that 600,000 miles of driving per crash. But then you can see here that full self-driving, which is mostly on city streets and stuff, because remember, this was 2022, so it wasn't using full self-driving on the highways at this point, it was only using them on city streets, but still it was 5 times safer than the US average fleet. And then the autopilot engaged, which again is a more primitive system, but it's definitely an autonomous vehicle solution. It's just not the version of full self-driving being used now, but that's about 7.5 times safer than the US fleet average. So Tesla is way, way ahead of the game here. Now, of course, remember, this is human in the loop. So you've got this autonomous software, but you've also got a person controlling it who can take over in emergency situations. So you can't take this as absolute proof that this is 5 times safer than the fleet or something, because it's autonomous driving plus human is 5 times safer than the fleet. But that means that already Tesla is providing a benefit to society. We're not looking at these cars killing people, as DeCourt talks about. We're looking at these cars saving lives. Even in the configuration that they're in now, they're saving lives. 5 times or 7.5 times safer is a really, really big deal. Continuing with the article, the systems are getting better. They have become good enough to play the odds, DeCourt said, but there are potentially insurmountable limitations and vulnerabilities. Potentially is not never, right? Baked into these systems that, according to DeCourt and other experts, means that, as it stands, human-level self-driving is likely not achievable. I'm not against autonomous vehicles. I'm against using people needlessly, notice that word, to do it, and companies going bankrupt for no reason trying to do it, DeCourt said. In general, I think there's a use for autonomy, and I'd like to help people get there. It's just not this way. And this little blue highlight right here, I'd like to help people get there, makes me wonder what DeCourt is selling. It seems to me like he might be selling some sort of alternative to what Tesla is doing and wants to cast aspersions on Tesla, follow the money sort of a situation. So he just says like it's not this way, but he doesn't really say how it should be done. How should it be done, right? What is the answer aside from working as hard as you can and trying to do the best that you can and saving lives along the way? Remember, this thing is already safer, demonstrably safer than the average human fleet. Driving full self-driving beta, driving the autopilot system, all of that stuff saves lives today, not tomorrow, which means that this software is already saving lives. So rather than using people or killing people needlessly, as it says in this article, Tesla is actually a benefit to society today as they improve the software, and they will improve the software. And as Elon says, they're working on solving a lot of AGI, of real world AGI. And while my optimism bias makes me think it's going to happen earlier than it probably will, full self-driving, autonomous driving is going to be solved, and that's going to make the world even safer than it is today. So again, while I'm not trying to dump on this article because I think it actually makes a reasonable attempt at understanding things, there are some very fundamental misunderstandings in this article which cause it to be dead wrong. And that's really unfortunate. And honestly, if Ian wants to talk to me, I would be happy to. I'll give a wave. If he got it all the way through the video and didn't get really upset about it or anything like that, if you got that far, I would be happy to do a point counterpoint or something like that and talk to you about this more for an upcoming article if you want to. In the meantime, I'll be driving my full self-driving beta around and feeling safer than I would without it. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it fun and interesting and thought-provoking and maybe a little provoking in general. If you did, please do like the video so other people can find it, and of course consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon, my YouTube channel members, and of course my ex-subscribers. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel in any way that you can, and of course if you want to join any of the teams, just check out the links in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have TeslaBot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, Success is a Possible Outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on. So check it out. And finally, thanks once again to Incogni for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to check out my link in the description, save 60% today, and start protecting your online identity. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.